Welcome. Today I am doing a little bit of a different format. I am going to interview one of my business friends and colleagues. Her name is Sarah Rau. And when I met her, we were both fledgling business entrepreneurs and didn't know very much. And we've learned a lot together. But more than that, her heart is with health coaching, health and wellness coaching. And so let me read to you her esteemed I can't. Bio. It says she is a national board certified health and wellness coach, and she's an emotional eating expert. Don't we all need one of those? And a busy entrepreneur of two, mom of two. Once fueled by Little Debbie snacks and Diet Coke and wine to survive the day, she now helps working moms cut cravings, stay consistent, and lose weight for good without willpower or restriction. Her unique approach combines hormone and gut health and nervous system regulation and also real life habit change. Sarah guides high achieving moms to finally implement what they know they should be doing so they can feel strong, confident, and in control. And even while juggling careers and families, her strategies are built to fit any schedule and make moms feel like a priority again without guilt. And so I am delighted that you are here, Sarah, and you are speaking my language. I am a mom of two and busy, and I too have a business. And as you well know, I work with a bunch of grieving people. And so Sarah and I ended up in a conversation about what does health and wellness look like in the space of people who are grieving. And so this conversation that we're recording today is kind of born out of that. And so with that, I want to welcome you, Sarah, to this conversation. So yay.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Sally. I so appreciate it. This is a subject that I can definitely talk on for hours and hours, so I will not, go into too much depth, but want to make sure I give you some real action plans to be able to help you move from where you currently are, especially when it comes to those thought processes and things that you may be struggling with that maybe other people are not struggling with, especially whenever it comes to grief and that and being able to move past that. And especially whenever it may be tied to some emotional eating aspects of that as well.
Yeah, it's so easy to just I know for myself, it's so easy just to dip into emotional eating rather than be intentional about it. So I'm really interested in what you're gonna say. But why don't we start with one of your first questions, which I think is such a brilliant one for people who are in this heavy emotional grieving space. But what are the small ways someone that we can begin to feel better, even when we're lacking motivation or when our energy feels completely gone? Like, what are some of these small ways that you have up your sleeve?
Yeah, for sure. So when we find it ourselves, really grieving, whether it's been 10 years or, 1 month, it can really take a toll, right? Both on our body and our mind as well. And they may be kind of feeling this like sense of running on empty. And that's sometimes why we reach for those emotional foods that kind of give us that dopamine hit right off the bat. And while we need that food to fuel our body, sometimes the nourishment can come in other forms as well. And that's one thing that I always talk about. And that can be things that include things like movement and self-care and sleep and reducing stress and all of these things that kind of we don't necessarily think about in terms of nourishing our body, but they can go a long way in order to help us move out of the state that we are currently in, whatever that may be. Um, and sometimes the shift doesn't have to be large shifts, right? They can be very, very small, 1% type of shifts, right? So even the smallest thing that we can do that can help move us forward consistently, but that doesn't mean that it has to be all or nothing. It can be very, very small things. I once had a client whose very first step to kind of get out of the spot that she was in emotionally, was to simply put on her shoes. That is the level of smallness that I'm talking about. If we want to flip that around, if it's something in regards to, actually fueling or nourishing our body, if you're someone who has been drinking primarily soda or energy drinks or whatever the case may be, something besides water, and you're wanting to kind of move towards that idea of health a little bit, it could just be simply a sip of water. It doesn't even have to be a whole glass. Like, we're talking minute changes. Um, One of the things that I did whenever I was trying to move past that was to put a glass of water, to make sure that I was drinking a glass of water before I had my coffee in the morning. So you can set them up in different ways from that standpoint as well. And then, other avenues of nourishing our bodies could be something like just listening to a soft, calming song to kind of help calm our bodies and our nervous system, or snacking on something that has protein in it in order to help stabilize the blood sugar. But the main thing here is that you don't need motivation. What you really need is a very simple plan that meets you where you are, even on your hardest days. So, kind of having that baseline of what your hardest days may be and what you can still do, even if you find yourself in an emotional state that you weren't necessarily expecting at, on that day, but still being able to say, you know what, I still did this. And so I'm still, you know, on that path, and I haven't completely fallen off track to where we can't get back on.
Love that idea of sort of these, I'm using a different word than you did, but sort of these micro habits. Like, okay, I'm going to have a big glass of water before my morning beverage. Like, that's just the thing I do now. Something as simple as that, that kind of makes it, if we make it a routine, then we don't have to use willpower. We really just follow the routine.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
I was curious, you talked a little bit about reaching for protein snacks if we want a snack. Would you be willing just to name some types of protein snacks that you're thinking about when you think about snacks?
Yeah, so I think it depends on where you're at in your journey, right? Everybody is in a different spot. So, if you're having something ultra processed right now, moving just slightly away from that, what does that look like? Maybe it's, instead of a candy bar, it's a protein bar, right? But maybe if
Oh,
you've been doing protein bars or other healthy protein options, like, what would that next healthier step closer to, like a Whole Foods type of, and thought process could be something like an apple with some almond butter on it, right? And so it really just depends on where you're at. So, sometimes going from a candy bar to an apple with almond butter is not going to be the easiest thing to do. So, kind of bridging your gap between where you are. And that's why I say, whenever we're talking about small plans, like, what does that look like for you? And creating that plan that's very specific to you and where you're at on your journey.
I really love how you are taking sort of the ideals that we all know, eat more protein, drink more water, and you're saying forget the ideal for the moment, figure out where you are, what's just that next step, what's the next step, and if we keep just asking that, it can be life changing is what you're
Yes.
saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely, for myself, I started, I always talk about my husband and I, we started when we were mainly drinking or eating white rice, right? And the process that we took to get from white rice to brown rice, and actually now cauliflower rice, my kids actually prefer it more than brown rice even. And so that journey has, been a transition. It's not a flip the switch. And so, it's that transition between the two makes it easier to follow as a lifetime habit.
Well, and part of what I love how you're talking about this is when I think of people who are heavy in grief, is think, brain capacity kind of shrinks. Like
Mhm.
your brain is doing so much work in other places that you aren't doing the normal things. So stocking your fridge with some really easy go-to snacks that you don't even have to think about, but that will nourish you, that will nourish your gut, that will help your body feel nourished, can actually help you feel better. That doesn't mean it takes away the grief. It means it just creates a body that has the nutrients it needs to do the work that it needs to do.
Exactly. Exactly. It's really about listening to your body and kind of tuning into what it's needing for sure.
So you've mentioned this sense of taking these big, ideals and breaking them up into really small moments, but you've also taught consistently about how consistency not being all or nothing.
Hmm.
Could you explain that and what that really looks for someone who is particularly stuck or drained or unmotivated?
Yes. So I love the thought of consistency because whenever I kind of started on my journey, I always thought that we had to do it 100% correct all the time. Otherwise, we fall off track, right? And then it's hard to get started again. And really, honestly, I have flipped that switch, and that really comes from the diet industry, right? They have us brainwashed, so to speak, on we have to do it perfectly in order to see results. But in honesty, the idea or concept of consistency doesn't have to mean perfection. It's about actually adjusting as you kind of go along to see what works for you. So, like, what is that minimum um, that you need to keep moving forward, and are you progressing versus taking steps back? And even if you're taking a small step back, that doesn't mean you've fallen off track. It just is part of your journey. I like to always kind of compare it to, if you take a trip, right, and you have to take a stop at a gas station for more gas, you're not going to start your trip all the way back at your house, right? You're going to continue on your journey. And so this concept of, kind of staying within kind of your guidelines, what is the minimum that you can possibly do that day, and at least doing that. And it can be something, even if it's like I had mentioned, even if it's something as small as putting on your shoes. If you do that, fine, you're on track and keep going, right? And it's not about creating a rigid plan. So it doesn't have to mean doing it every single day. It can be, and I don't usually recommend most habits to be every single day because it doesn't give us room for flexibility. So this idea of, doing it as, um, kind of that minimum, like staying in between the two lines in the road and moving forward throughout your progress. But it's really doesn't have to be 100%, because if you try to do something 100%, well, the likelihood is that you're not going to always be able to do it 100%, right? We're going to have hard days. Everybody does. And you have to be okay with that. So what is the next best thing? And so just kind of staying along your path and keep going, right? So maybe on your best days, you eat, your servings of vegetables for the day, right? And on your hardest days, maybe it just simply is grabbing a piece of fruit, and being okay with that, right? And it's okay. Being okay with the fact that it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Because consistency is really about showing up imperfectly, actually,
Hmm.
and not falling off track. And I do have an additional training on this. It's like a whole hour-long training on just this concept of consistency because it's
Hmm.
so I love this concept. And so if you want a little bit more information about that, I can definitely share a little bit how you can get that at the end of the thing. But even 10% better, doing something 10% is better than being perfect and then not doing it all and stopping, right? So it's definitely not, that all or nothing concept. In really asking yourself, what does staying on track look like when life gets hard for you? And knowing that ahead of time and then being able to do it with intention is kind of the key there.
Yeah, I love this. I personally cannot be told enough that it's not all or nothing. For whatever reason, my brain easily goes there. And especially around things around eating and exercise and just these sort of healthful things. It's like, oh, I did something 5 days a week for 3 months. I did this program. Now it's over, and then I don't touch anything for 3 months. And it's like, well, that's maybe not the goal here. That's not like yay, but ooh, let's try to even that out a little bit. And I love that. I may circle back around for that training because it sounds like I might need some. But yeah, this sense of like I've even had to do that in business lately. This sense of like kids are home, summer's full. It's just full. It's good and full. But what is the bare minimum I can do for the business, for my health, for, life, for food for the children? What is the bare minimum I can do and everybody still be okay? Like maybe we're not, ideal, but we're okay. So I think it's a good it's a good way to think about it. We don't have to be all or nothing. We can be some and not all.
Yep. And still seeing progress. And oftentimes it takes that weight off of our shoulders that we don't
Mm.
have that like feeling of shame and guilt because we're not sticking to it, right?
Oh, I love that. It even takes some of the emotional burden off of
Hmm.
us.
Yep.
Um, Makes it a little less emotionally charged. Ooh. Hmm. You and I may be talking after this, Sarah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So one of in my Facebook group, I have a regular post that comes up about comfort food, and I just sort of ask people what their comfort food is. And many times people will talk about um, the mashed potatoes and the gravies of the world, the cakes, the cookies, the candies. My personal is, I don't know, Mexican food. That's my comfort food. Like I want the chips, I want the melted cheese, I want all of that. And it's easy to turn to these types of things when grief takes over, when we're having particularly emotionally heavy days. And so I'd love to hear your take on comfort food and what it means to begin to shift, like you said, kind of without that shame, without that guilt, or maybe even without feeling restricted, which feels miraculous. So, what's your take on all of this?
Yeah, when you said mashed potatoes and gravy, I instantly tasted my grandma Kramer's mashed potatoes and gravy. They were homemade, like it like makes my heart, like, and so I totally get that. Everybody has those comfort foods that we turn to, no matter what they are. They're the things that, give us that little boost of dopamine hit so we feel better, right? But what's really happening here is that comfort food is, kind of becomes a coping strategy. But the thing is that it's not a flaw. And I want you to remember that. Like that doesn't mean because you turn to food in your emotional times that there's something wrong with you, because there's absolutely
Mm.
nothing. And it's really about trying to meet your needs. Um, and the thing to remember about this is that we really need to begin to turn, when we find ourselves turning to that, those comfort foods, is thinking about what it is that we actually need. Why are we turning to our comfort foods at that point in
Mm.
time? And what is it a replacement for? Because usually it's something other than food that is what we really need. So, like I said, turning into your body and listening to what your body has to say.
Mm.
And we've been so disconnected from our bodies that this can be really hard. So finding somebody that can kind of help guide you along that path to kind of figure out what that might be, right? Whether it be sleep, right? Or time with a friend, or some quiet time to yourself, or, finding out what that may be that it really is missing, right? Um, and finding ways that can kind of both soothe and support your body at the same time. So if it is some kind of food, like making it something that also helps to nourish your body. So, not turning into that bag of chips necessarily, but maybe it's, a warm soup or a nice,
Mm.
cool smoothie or something like that. But just something that can kind of both nourish your body as well as kind of turning into that emotional side. Now for some of you, your go-to may be sweets, right? Like I have a lot of people, their go-to is always sweets. So what does that look like? Sometimes it's something other than the food, like I said, right? So it could be something that you mean that you need to find some sweetness, so to speak, in your life. You're missing that like little spark of joy, right? So maybe for you, maybe that's something like gardening or knitting or some kind of intentional time spent that brings joy into your life. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be something very small. But just trying to tune in to figure out like what is going on in your life at that time and figure out why you're turning to food and what could potentially kind of help that. Now, I go into a whole other spiel sometimes, and that is, a lot of people ask me for food swaps.
I
And
did. I totally asked her. She was like, I'm
yeah,
not doing that. I was like, okay.
I don't do food swaps. And one of the reasons why is because the concept of swap does not make sense in my mind because you cannot ever tell me that a candy bar is going to taste or an apple is going to taste like a candy bar. It's not, right? And so when we have in our minds that this apple is supposed to replace this candy bar, I ain't buying it, guys. I'm just not. And so we have to really have the apple with intention. And there's a lot of tools that I use with all of my clients to kind of instead of using swaps, but to fuel our body while still being able to enjoy the things that we love, right? And so sometimes it's also about a mindset shift, right? Instead of saying, God, I feel so guilty, I'm so ashamed of myself because I turned to that bag of Doritos or whatever it may be today. Instead, really beginning to get curious and ask yourself, I was seeking comfort today, and that's why I turned to the bag of Doritos. What else might help me next time? And what was I missing that could kind of fill that void that that bag of chips um, gave me, right? And like I said, to get curious about what your body might actually be needing. Because food is really part of the healing. So I want you to remember that, and that's okay. But it's not the only form of care that you deserve and that your body is really craving. And so, being able to tune into your body and kind of figuring out what that might be.
It's so interesting. I'd never, for as often as you and I have talked, I've never thought about how food is healing, which I have heard in other contexts, but I never thought about it in the sense of like the work that I do. And part of what I find suddenly so interesting is this idea of like, you're talking about sort of the food part of it. And I'm talking about kind of the emotional processing part of this. And that could be a really powerful duo. Like we might consider collabing in the future. Because even just inviting people to sit with themselves is a risky proposition, like it's not easy to do. And so it would be interesting to kind of continue to explore that a little bit because I know for me, yeah, I want comfort, but what would it be to make a creamy stew instead of, stop by the Mexican food restaurant? Feels like, oh my God, that's a brand new universe. Um, but to be able in those moments to say, I'm really missing mom is a really hard realization. And so what does that food is healing look like when we're just surviving? So anyway, such a powerful image that you have offered us. So Sarah, how do I, but I'm asking for all of us, how do we sort of understand where we are on this health journey? I guess maybe like get a baseline for ourselves. And what does kind of adjusting day to day look like in real life? Not in the books and the blogs, but like I wake up every morning. How do we do these types of things in real life?
Yeah, for sure. So the reason, honestly, that most plans don't work, I kind of alluded to it before, was that they're not flexible, right? This concept
Mhm.
of consistency and not being flexible to stay with it, right? And so, I work with all of my clients to establish kind of a baseline for what they can still do even on days that things are hard. And so it can be something so small, and they can continue to be able to do it moving forward. The important thing here is to know what that baseline might look like for you, so before you actually have that hard day, because um when you're in the middle of it, you're not going your brain is too overwhelmed with everything else. It's not going to think about this baseline. And so then it would, after you kind of establish that baseline, even if it's something so simple as having a sip of water, the important thing is to do it with actual intention, because when
Mhm.
you do it with intention, you are getting the control back instead of the food having control over you. The same thing can go for, if you're working on, adding in more movement, just a simple, okay, I put my tennis shoes on and that's all I can do today. And being like, okay, I am still doing it with intention and I still have control over the situation. Um, and I think that that's really important, especially for those of us who are in this state of grieving, and at a time when maybe something has happened, to kind of bring it all back to the forefront, right? And so even on those hard days, being able to do it with intention, even if it's not the big grandiose step that you think that you need to be making, because that's what all of the plans all say. And really setting those minimums, and it can be something so small. I've given several examples already, but some others could be simply just eating one small bite of fruit or vegetable, um, taking a mindful pause, even if it literally is, for 3 seconds, because sometimes that is literally all we have. And so, but being able to do it with intention gives you that control back. And then, kind of after that time, or well, even in the course of it, like what you're asking yourself, what feels doable today? If the only thing that feels doable today is simply having a sip of water, that's okay. Um, and then kind of considering like what might drain me. Like if having a whole glass of water is too much for you, then don't do that, because your body's still trying to do all of this other stuff. And so having kind of this like in between these two, like a cup of water versus a sip of water, and just doing something in between those two. Um,
I
and
love that
what's
you kind of
really,
have a small goal and a big goal. And as long as we're in
yeah,
between the
kind of.
two, we're going to be good.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe your goal is to go for a walk every day and have a nourishing lunch. But then on Tuesday, that just feels too overwhelming, because you're too emotionally spent on something else. And your mind has got too many other things going on. And so maybe you opt for just stretching in bed before you go to sleep. And maybe it simply is having a frozen meal and taking a nap at some point. Like, we have to honor our bodies, especially when they are going through so many other things. So it's really important about having this baseline, though, is not about a punishment, right? Like, it's about giving our bodies what it needs. And kind of throwing it that lifeline, so to speak, that kind of helps get us past that next part, that next step, right? And that's why I always say like doing it with intention is kind of that lifeline, kind of helping pull us back on
Mhm.
track, right? And keeping us afloat on our journey. And it really helps us to stay in that the game, or stay afloat, so to speak, even when this our emotions and our grief and these overwhelming thoughts are overtaking us.
Yeah. Oh, I hear your words so powerfully, Sarah. And setting those goalposts for me has been really helpful of just, okay, I can't do everything I want to do at this moment in life, but I can do something, and figuring out what the minimum every day is, but also what the maximum I'm going to work for. Because I have two kids, a business, a spouse, all the things that also need my attention. So just even giving myself the freedom to say, I'm going to go up to here, and then I'm going to be good with it, feels also very freeing. Well,
Yes.
Sarah, thank you so much for being here. And how on earth do we get a hold of you?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Sally, for having me, for sure. I love talking about this, and if you're looking for some help on, what that might look like for you, definitely reach out to me. The links to get a hold of me on Facebook will be down below. Also, I do have a short checklist, kind of like a strategy of kind of what we've discussed today, kind of in a little bit details that are kind of a little bit more of a checklist style. But it's really about finding that energy again, for rebuilding that energy and motivation, even if it feels like you're starting all over. Know that you're not, right? And as well as, if you would like to watch the replay of the consistency training that I did, that has really been like the biggest one that most people opt for, because it's so enlightening. You can definitely reach me Facebook. It's Sarah, Sarah dot Rau, my last name, Rau dot wellness dot zero. And find me there. Make sure you friend request me and send me a message letting me know that you were here. I love connecting with people and kind of helping them along this journey.
Amazing. And I will also have that link down in the comments or description or wherever you're watching this. That link should be close, either above or below or on the side. I'm not sure,
Somewhere.
but it will be there. So, Sarah, thank you so much. And in all honesty, I have learned so much today and just really appreciated your time, and you've opened my eyes to some things that I think I might need to connect with you again, and have some follow-up questions. So yeah, with that, I will see you all next time, and I will end the recording.
All right. Thanks.